Follow my story until the end and drop the city you're watching from in the comments. I want to know who's out there listening. I need to tell you what happened to me last Christmas. Not because I want sympathy, not because I need anyone to take my side, but because I've been sitting with this for months now, turning it over and over in my head. And I think some of you might understand in a way that the people closest to me simply cannot. Let me start a little before the actual moment everything broke open. Because the devil really is in the details. And if I skip the details, you won't understand why I did what I did. My name is Dorothy. I'm 67 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom condo in Naperville, Illinois, just outside Chicago, and I have lived alone for 11 years, ever since my husband Robert passed from a cardiac event on a Tuesday morning in March. He was 58. He had just made coffee. I found him in his chair. I tell you that not for pity, but because you need to understand what I built after. Alone. Everything that came after Robert, I built alone. We had one son. His name is Caleb. He was 26 when his father died, already married to his wife Trish, living 40 minutes away in Downers Grove. In those first years after Robert, Caleb called every Sunday. He came by for dinner most weeks. I thought we were close. I genuinely believe that. I also need to tell you about the money, because people in the comments of these kinds of videos always want to know. And honestly, it matters to the story. Robert had a good life insurance policy. He'd also been disciplined about his 401k since his 20s. When he passed, I inherited roughly $890,000 between the policy payout, his retirement accounts, and the equity in our house when I downsized. I'm not a wealthy woman by any stretch of what wealthy means in this country today, but I was comfortable. I was secure. And I was grateful for that because I knew how rare it was. Caleb knew about the inheritance. I was transparent with him. Maybe too transparent because I wanted him to know that I was okay, that he didn't have to worry about me. What I didn't anticipate was that knowing would change something in him, or maybe it changed something in Trish. Honestly, I'm still not sure which one of them it changed first. It started small, the way these things always do. A mention here and there that they were looking at a bigger house because the kids needed more space. A comment about how daycare was brutal on their budget, nothing direct. Nothing you could call out without feeling like you were being paranoid or ungenerous. I helped. Of course I helped. That's what you do. I put in $60,000 toward the down payment on their house in Downers Grove in 2019. It's a beautiful house. 4 bedrooms, a yard, a finished basement where my grandchildren, Lily and Cooper, could play. I was happy to do it. I told myself I was investing in my family's stability, that Robert would have done the same. Over the years that followed, the help continued. Some of it I offered, some of it was asked for. Trisha's car broke down, and they didn't have the cushion to replace it. I gave them $18,000. Caleb switched jobs, and there was a gap of 4 months between his severance running out and his new salary starting. I covered $22,000 in their mortgage and bills during that stretch. There was a summer when Lily needed occupational therapy and their insurance only covered a portion. I paid the remaining $14,000 out of pocket without them even finishing the sentence. By the time last year arrived, I had given my son and his family just over $310,000 across 5 years. And I want to be careful here, because I am not telling you that number to make Caleb look like a villain. I am telling you that number because it is the truth, and because I need you to understand what I was carrying inside me when Christmas came. I am 67 years old. I am not a spender. I clip coupons at the Jewel-Osco. I drive a 2017 Honda CR-V with 74,000 miles on it. I have not taken a real vacation since Robert and I went to Sedona in 2012. I gave that money freely, and I would give it again, but freely means something. It means it was a gift, not an expectation, not a given. Somewhere along the way, I think Trish stopped seeing it as a gift. Little things. She stopped thanking me when I watched the kids so they could have date nights. She started referring to my condo as small, in front of Lily and Cooper in a tone that wasn't quite joking. She corrected me in front of the children, my parenting choices, my recipes, even the way I read books aloud to Lily, which apparently I did wrong. There was a particular afternoon in October when I was helping Cooper with his Halloween costume, and Trish walked in, looked at what we'd made together, and said, "Oh, we were going to do something nicer." And then she took it from his hands. I didn't say anything. I never said anything. I smiled and I helped with dinner and I drove home and I sat in my parking garage for 20 minutes before I could go inside. Caleb saw none of it, or he chose not to. I'm still working out which one it was. By November, the Sunday calls had dwindled to every other week, then every 3 weeks. When I did reach him, he sounded distracted, slightly impatient, like I was an item on a to-do list he was getting to. I told myself it was stress. The holidays are hard. Everyone is stretched thin in November. I planned Christmas the way I always plan Christmas. I ordered gifts for Lily and Cooper in October, a wooden art easel for Lily, who loves to draw, and a beginner's robotics kit for Cooper, who had been asking about coding. I wrapped them myself. I baked Robert's mother's shortbread recipe, the one I've made every December for 31 years, and I packed it in a tin with wax paper the way she taught me. I bought a bottle of red wine that Caleb mentioned he liked. I drove to the party store and bought a centerpiece for their table because I wanted to contribute something to the space. I did all of this because I believed I was coming for Christmas. On December 21st, I texted Caleb to ask what time he wanted me there on the 25th and whether I should bring anything else besides the shortbread. He didn't respond that day. He didn't respond the next day either. On December 23rd at 9:14 in the morning, I got a text, not a call, a text. "Mom, Trish and I have been talking and we think it would be best if you didn't come this year. We need some space to do Christmas as just our immediate family. We hope you understand. We'll connect in the new year." I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and I stood at my sink and I looked out the window at the snow on the back fence for a very long time. I want to tell you what that felt like, but I'm not sure I have the right words even now. It wasn't just hurt. It was something colder than hurt. Like a door you didn't know was closing had already shut and locked, and you were only now finding out. I thought about Robert, how he used to say that family is the thing you come home to, how he believed that without a single doubt in his body. I thought about him and I thought he would be devastated, not angry, devastated. And something about imagining his face made me sadder than anything else. I did not respond to Caleb's text that day. I spent Christmas Eve doing something I hadn't done in years. I went to the 5 o'clock Mass at St. Raphael's, the church Robert and I had attended for 20 years. And I sat in the 3rd pew from the back where we always sat, and I just breathed. The choir sang. The candles were lit. I stayed until the last hymn finished and the nave emptied. Then I drove home, poured myself a glass of wine, and ate shortbread for dinner. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you because it was the night I made my decision. Sitting at my kitchen table, alone on Christmas Eve, I did the accounting. Not the emotional accounting. I would do that later, over many weeks. I did the actual accounting. I went through my records. I pulled the wire transfer confirmations, the checks I'd photographed, the Venmo history. $310,000 over 5 years. To a son who sent me a text on December 23rd to tell me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. I am not a dramatic woman. I am not impulsive. I taught middle school English for 22 years. I have graded 10,000 essays. I have sat across from parents and children in conferences where the tension could peel paint off the walls, and I have remained measured every single time. But there comes a point, and if you are a woman of a certain age, I think you know the point I mean, where being measured starts to feel like disappearing, where swallowing things whole becomes its own kind of damage. I picked up the phone, not to call Caleb. I called my financial advisor, Denise. who I have worked with for 9 years and who knows me well enough to pick up on a Saturday even when she's off the clock. I told her what had happened in a very calm voice. I told her what I wanted to do. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Dorothy, I'll have the paperwork ready on the 27th. On December 26th, I also called my attorney, an estate planning lawyer named Mr. Hendricks, whom Robert and I had used since 2003. I left him a voicemail. He called back within 2 hours. I will not detail everything I changed in that period, because some of it is still in process and because it's private. But I will tell you the broad strokes. I restructured my estate plan. Caleb remained in the will. He is my son, and that will not change, but the disbursement structure changed significantly. A portion that had been earmarked as a direct inheritance now goes into a trust administered by Mr. Hendricks, with conditions attached. The monthly transfer I had been making into an account Caleb had access to, a holdover from the job gap period that I had simply never closed, I stopped that. On December 27th, I sent Denise the instruction. It was processed by December 30th. I also changed my phone settings. I didn't block Caleb entirely. I am not trying to punish my grandchildren who did nothing wrong, but I muted his contact and turned off red receipts. If he reached out, I would see it in my own time, on my terms. Then I waited. The new year came quietly. I had dinner with my neighbor Helen and her husband on New Year's Eve. We watched the ball drop in Times Square on her television, and I drank one glass of champagne and was home by 12:15. It was genuinely one of the more peaceful evenings I can remember. On January 3rd, I got a call from Caleb. I let it go to voicemail. He said they hoped I had a good holiday and that they'd love to get together soon. Cheerful, breezy, like the 23rd had not happened. I listened to it twice and then I went for a walk. On January 7th, I got another call. I let it go to voicemail again. This time, his voice was different, less cheerful. "Mom, I know things have been, I don't know. Can you just call me back? I'm a little worried." On January 11th, the call came from a number I didn't recognize. It was Trish. She identified herself quickly and then said, in a voice that was working very hard to sound casual, "Dorothy, I'm not sure if Caleb mentioned, but we've been trying to reach you. Is everything okay? We're a little concerned." I let that voicemail sit for 2 days. What I did not know, and what I would only learn later, was that the automatic transfer Caleb had come to rely on, the one I'd stopped, was something he had factored into their monthly budget without telling me. He had been using it to cover $1,800 in recurring expenses every month. When it stopped without warning in the last days of December, they went into January short without understanding why. He checked the account on January 8th and saw the transfer had not come through. Then he checked again, and suddenly he was worried about me. I want to be careful here, because I know how this part sounds, and I will tell you honestly, there was a part of me that felt something cold and satisfied when I understood what had happened. That is not a feeling I'm proud of. I'm not putting it in here to seem powerful. I'm putting it in here because it's true, and this story is only worth telling if it's true. But there was a larger part of me, the part that had sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes rather than cry where someone could see me, the part that had planned Christmas gifts in October for grandchildren who didn't spend Christmas with me. That part felt something else entirely, something more like grief than victory, because I had not wanted it to come to this. I had wanted my son to call me on December 23rd. I had wanted him to say, "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have talked to you sooner. I should have handled this differently." And I would have forgiven him instantly. That is the truth. I would have forgiven him instantly. He hadn't done that. And now we were here. On January 13th, I called Caleb back. He answered on the first ring. He sounded relieved, and then almost immediately, the relief shifted into something more urgent. He asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. He said they hadn't heard from me and they were worried. I said gently that I had needed some time and that I had used it to do some thinking and some administrative work. There was a pause. "Administrative work," he repeated. "Yes," I said. I made some changes to my financial arrangements. Some things that had been running on autopilot for a while, I updated them. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, can we come over? Can Trish and I come over and sit down with you? I said yes. I told him Saturday the 18th at 2 in the afternoon. I want to tell you about the hours before they arrived, because those hours mattered. I cleaned my condo, not because it was dirty, but because keeping my hands busy keeps my mind from spinning. I made a pot of coffee. I took the shortbread out of the freezer. I had packed some away and put it on a plate. I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote out on a legal pad in Robert's old pen the things I needed to say, not a script, more like an anchor, so I wouldn't drift in the current of the conversation. When the doorbell rang, I took one breath. Then I opened the door. Caleb looked tired. I could see that immediately. He'd lost a little weight, the kind you lose when you're not sleeping right. He hugged me at the door and held on a moment longer than usual, and I felt something in my chest pull tight. He is still my son. Whatever else is true, that is also true. Trish shook my hand. Not a hug. A handshake. We have never been warm with each other, and I have made peace with that. But she looked directly at me, which I noticed, and I thought, she has rehearsed this. She knows what this meeting is. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured the coffee. I let them settle. Caleb spoke first. He said, "And I am going to try to get this right. Mom, I owe you an apology. The way I handled Christmas was wrong. I should have called you. I should have talked to you weeks before and not sent a text 3 days before the holiday. That was cowardly, and I'm sorry. I did not say anything right away. I let those words sit where they had landed. Then I said, 'Thank you for saying that. I want you to know I heard it.'" Trish spoke then. She said that things had felt complicated and that she hadn't felt, and then she stopped, recalibrated. She said she'd been feeling overwhelmed and that she hadn't handled her feelings well and that some of her behavior toward me over the past year had not been fair. She said it in the careful way as someone who has thought very hard about every word, but she said it. I am 67 years old. I have been a mother, a wife, a teacher, a widow. I know the difference between a genuine reckoning and a performance prompted by alarm. I sat with what Trish said and I looked at her face, and what I decided was that it was somewhere in the middle. Part of it was real. Part of it was fear. But I thought a person can start in fear and end up somewhere true. That happens. I have seen it happen. So I told them what I needed to tell them. I told them that I had loved supporting their family over the years and that I did not regret a single dollar of it, but that I had made a mistake in letting support become expectation without ever naming it out loud. I told them that the text on December 23rd had broken something in me in a way I was still working to understand. I told them that I had made changes to my financial arrangements. I didn't detail them and I didn't need to, and that those changes reflected a new chapter, not a punishment. I told them that I would always be their mother and Lillian Cooper's grandmother, and that none of that was in question. But I told them that the relationship going forward had to be different, that I needed to be treated like a person, not a resource, that my presence in their lives had to be something they chose, not something they tolerated in exchange for financial comfort. Caleb cried, not theatrically, just quietly, with his hand over his mouth, looking at the table. I handed him a napkin. Trish did not cry, but she held herself very still in a way that told me she was feeling something. We talked for nearly 3 hours. The coffee went cold. I reheated it twice. At some point, I put out the shortbread and Caleb took a piece without asking, the way he used to when he was a teenager coming home from school, and that small, ordinary thing made me feel something I cannot quite name, something like, we are still here. Even now, we are still here. We did not resolve everything that afternoon. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think these stories often get wrapped up too neatly, and real life doesn't work that way. We did not hug at the door and wipe the slate clean. There are things that were said and done that will take longer to process than one Saturday afternoon, but when they left, something had shifted. I felt it in the quality of the air after the door closed. I stood at my kitchen window, the same window where I'd stood on December 23rd looking at the snow, and I watched Caleb's car pull out of the parking lot, and I thought about Robert. I thought about how he always said that love without honesty is just performance. He used to say that. I don't know where he got it from, but he believed it completely. I believe it too. I just forgot to practice it for a very long time. I'm not going to tell you that everything is fixed. It isn't. We're in a period now that I can only describe as a careful renegotiation. Caleb calls every Sunday again, every Sunday without fail. And the calls last longer now and feel more honest. He asks me real questions. He listens to the answers. Trish and I are not close and we may never be, but she was cordial at Lily's birthday in February and she asked my opinion about Lily's summer reading program and I thought that is something. That is a beginning. Lily and Cooper do not know that any of this happened. They are 7 and 9. They do not need to carry this. When I see them, I bring the art supplies and the shortbread, and I sit on the floor and I do puzzles, and that is enough. That is more than enough. I have thought a lot in these past months about what I would tell a woman my age who is in the place I was last December, who is standing at a sink, looking at the snow and wondering how she got here. I would tell her this. You are allowed to love someone completely and still require that they treat you with dignity. Those two things are not in conflict. You spent decades giving. You are allowed to say this is the shape that giving takes from here. You are allowed to draw that line without apology and without guilt. I am 67 years old. I drive a 2017 Honda CR-V. I clip coupons at the Jewel Osco. I bake shortbread every December from a recipe that belongs to a woman who has been gone for 20 years, and when I eat it, I feel her and Robert both standing in my kitchen with me. I lost a lot last Christmas. I also found something I hadn't realized I'd set down. If any of what I've said today reaches you, if you're sitting somewhere right now and you recognized your own story in mine, I hope you'll leave a comment. You don't have to share everything. Just say where you're watching from. Just let me know you're there. I see every single comment. Everyone, thank you for being here with me today. I mean that more than I can say. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any grand philosophical sense, just in the plain, honest way you think about things when you're 67 and you've lived enough to see how the threads connect. What happened between me and my son didn't start on December 23rd. It started years earlier, in all the small moments when I chose to keep the peace instead of speaking the truth. Every time Trish corrected me in front of the grandchildren and I smiled and said nothing. Every time Caleb's calls got shorter and I told myself he was just busy. Every time I transferred money into that account without ever asking, does this still make sense? Is this still working the way I intended? I was not a passive woman in my professional life. I taught other people's children for 22 years to think critically, to question assumptions, to understand that silence in the face of something wrong is its own kind of answer. And yet, in my own home, in my own family, I had somehow stopped applying any of that. That is the part that took me the longest to sit with, not what Caleb did, what I had allowed to build. There's a kind of generosity that comes from love, and then there's a kind of generosity that comes from fear. Fear of conflict, fear of being seen as difficult, fear of losing something you're already halfway losing. I had been practicing the second kind for so long I had stopped noticing the difference. The $310,000 was not all love. Some of it was love, but some of it was me trying to hold something together by financial force when what was actually needed was an honest conversation. That's not wisdom. That's avoidance wearing a generous face. What I did in those quiet days between Christmas and the New Year, the calls to Denise, the conversation with Mr. Hendricks, the decision to stop the automatic transfer, that wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. It was the first genuinely honest financial decision I had made in years. It was me finally saying, the arrangement we have been living under is not the arrangement I agreed to, and I am correcting it, quietly, legally, without drama. the consequence that followed. Caleb's panic, the missed calls, Trisha's careful voicemail. That wasn't something I engineered. It was simply what happens when reality is finally allowed to be what it is. You cannot build a life on a foundation that doesn't actually exist and then be surprised when someone stops pretending the foundation is there. What I want for Caleb, what I've always wanted for him, is that he becomes a man who doesn't need a safety net to treat his mother well. That's it. That is the whole wish, not the money back, not an apology perfectly worded, just a son who calls because he wants to hear my voice, not because he's afraid of what I might do with my estate plan. We are not there yet, but we are closer than we were on December 23rd, and I think the distance we've already traveled tells me something about what's possible. I learned that doing the hard thing quietly is still doing the hard thing, that integrity doesn't require an audience, that the most important conversations I have ever had in my life were the ones I almost didn't start. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: the people who love you should not need to be incentivized, and you deserve to be chosen without conditions attached.